Okay, so firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. I've been watching the webinar series last year, and it was a really great webinar series, and I'm just stoked to be able to talk at the first one in 22. So thanks, Joe, for the invite. Today, I'm going to be talking about drilling into the hot rocks at the Eden project. I like to start these presentations with a wider context first, and then sort of narrow them down into a focal point. And today the focal point will be Eden. So first, I'll give you a context of why geothermal is important. I'm preaching to the converted here. We're all aware of why it's important and what it is, but I just like to start with the context. Then we'll go from the global power and traditional geothermal down to UK and its applications for heat, and then focus on Cornish hot rocks. I'll look at geothermal in Cornwall, why it's possible and why possibly it's been kickstarted there in this part of the world. And surface exploration, how we go about exploring for the perfect site for geothermal energy with pretty much limited to no data. And then I'll focus on Eden and how they took that approach forward. So geothermal energy, it is a key player in the race to net zero, and it's a completely underutilized resource. It's the heat derived from the original formation of the planet and from the decay of the radioactive elements in the Earth's crust. And there's a lot of it. 99.9% of the Earth's mass exists at a temperature of more than 100 degrees, and we barely have tapped into it. It's a huge resource that could really help us towards our ambitions for climate change. So the average geothermal gradient in the crust is 25 degrees per kilometre, and that means we can use it effectively anywhere, particularly for heat purposes as well as power. Traditionally, the global power generation is centred around the Ring of Fire and volcanic regions, and that's reflected in the map on the left. These figures are slightly out of date, they're 2020 figures. So at that point, there was 15 gigawatts of installed power globally, and that was due to increase to 20 by 25. So just in 5 years, that's quite a significant increase. And currently 29 countries use it, and there are 600 power plants in operation or under construction. But again, that mainly reflects our traditional geothermal power plants in volcanic regions. However, to meet the need that we're aiming towards for geothermal power, there will be an increasing number of EGS projects. And that's where the likes of the projects in Cornwall and what could happen in Ireland will be focused if they're looking at power. It will have to be EGS projects. We're not lucky enough to have geothermal resources close to the surface. But I will bang on about this. It's not just power, it is heat too. And on a global scale, providing heating for homes, industry, and other applications accounts for around half of the total global energy consumption and contributes 40% of global carbon dioxide levels and emissions. That's huge. If we can crack decarbonized heat, then we are on the way to net zero. 70 countries currently use it for direct heat from geothermal, and the resource has incredible potential to drive positive change. And I think one thing I really like about geothermal, and it's why I'm involved with geothermal, is its ability to sort of unlock the imagination. There's quite a lot you can do with heat that's quite fun as well as really important. So you've got obvious things like district heating systems, but the ability for geothermal to decarbonize our heat intensive industry is huge. It's things like food processing, factories, laundries, breweries, distilleries, all these things need geothermal. And with the global pandemic that we've just had, I think it's just highlighted that we can't always rely on that global economy, and particularly for things like food security. The shelves were bare at points, or at least they were in Cornwall. And geothermal could really help in sustainable food production and growing what we need in our countries and maintaining our lifestyle, because this picture of bananas is from Iceland. We can grow everything that we need, and the Netherlands do it fantastically. There's no reason we can't. And they also can be used for heating leisure facilities. A pet project of mine and a personal ambition is to heat a wave pool. I love surfing, and I think it would be awesome to be able to have a heated wave pool and surf in the coldest countries in the world. You know, use your imagination, it's great. But also things like sustainable mining. If we're going to move forward and we need tech metals, lithium is very high on government agendas. And if we can extract that through geothermal brines in a sustainable and green manner, that is just so cool. It's brilliant. So we're going to hone down now from the big picture, going down to the UK. And again, about half of our energy demand is for space heating, and a third of it accounts for our greenhouse gas emissions. Yet we only have 2 megawatt thermal installed from direct geothermal use, and that is in Southampton, in the Sherwood Sandstone, which I guess is quite akin to the resources you might have in Belfast. But other European countries with similar resources have much higher utilizations, and it's mainly due to government policy. Like Cohen alluded to, we need to work on policy, government interventions, low interest loans, regulations, incentives. They've had a kickstart, and I feel, at least in the UK, we haven't had that kickstart, and we need it to get things going. In terms of resource, it's really varied. We have a lot of resources. We have the hot sedimentary aquifers, like I mentioned before, and they're not just present in Southampton, they're present throughout parts of the UK. We have the heat producing granites, which is what I specialize in Cornwall, but they're not just in Cornwall. They're in Scotland, they're in Weardale. We've buried karst systems and limestones, which is what France are really good at, using these systems for district heating. And the BGS are looking into that more, which is great. We have abandoned mines. Again, the Netherlands use abandoned mines, and Nova Scotia for district heating. And the Coal Authority are making real good headway with abandoned mines for heating. I'm just hoping that tin mines can also be used one day. So we're pushing that front in Cornwall as well. And deep disused boreholes offshore. We've got a huge oil and gas industry offshore in the UK. There is a chance for that to be used for geothermal as well. Otherwise they'll go to waste, and that is being looked at. I'm just not quite sure how you would transport the heat, but that's a whole other topic. And then you've got the shallow subsurface, more traditional sort of ground source heat pumps, and anywhere in between. So it's not a question of we don't have the technology, it's just using what works for the location. And we do have the technology, they all exist. Ground source heat pumps have been used for years. We know how to drill deep holes. We've got a very established oil and gas industry. It's the same thing, we're just looking for water, not oil and gas, and we can tap into those mines as well. So it's not a question of we can't, it's just we haven't got it in place yet, but we will. So now coming down again, why Cornwall? We've done global, UK, Cornwall. Well, you need 2 ingredients for successful geothermal projects, and that is heat and permeability. And in Cornwall, we have both. We have the Cornubian batholith that runs throughout the county from Dartmoor in the north to the Isles of Scilly. And that gives us an elevated geothermal gradient of 33 to 35 degrees per kilometre, when compared to the rest of the UK, oh, it just moved on, excuse me, which is about 26 degrees per kilometre. So it's still possible, but when you're trying to get an industry going, it's good to go for the higher heat flow areas, because drilling is an expensive hobby. So basically, the less far you need to drill to get to the required temperatures for geothermal, the better. We also have enhanced permeability. So we have these great faults, north-northwest to south-southeast striking faults across the county that have had a multi-phase reactivation history, last reactivated in the tertiary, and they provide fluid flow. And we know that they have fluid flow because we've got an extremely long mining history. And in those mining records, there are records of hydrocarbon seeps within the mines. Now, the nearest place that they would have come from is the Bristol Channel. So that's really good evidence of far field fluid flow, which is a tongue twister. And we also have thermal springs that are recorded in the mines. There's mine workings at 400 meters with thermal springs coming out of the well at 60 degrees. So that's way above what you would expect for the geothermal gradient. And also areas of elevated uranium content. Uranium's a mobile element, and so we can see that it's been been flowing through these structures. And there's not just one or two of these structures. This is a select few, but there are many, and they offset the loads that the miners would have mined in the wells, in the mines back in the day. And I'll show you an example of that later. So when you're selecting a site for geothermal, we have the mine data, which is amazing, but it does only go down to 900 meters maximum depth. And we're looking at intersecting a feature at 4,500, 5,000 meters. So there's a substantial gap. We have a heat flow map, which is currently not that well populated. So we're working at the moment with a project called Deep Digital Cornwall to populate that heat flow map, drill some more wells, and get more of a resource map together. We have surface geology maps from the BGS, which were done in the 70s, 90s. Again, pretty old material, very good, but it's old material. We have aeromagnetic data, gravity surveys flown in the 80s. And actually recently, about 3 weeks ago, a company flew over and did another gravity survey, but it's not public. So we're going to have to buy that if we want access to it, I think. And we have a few drilled boreholes. The first of which, the first geothermal project in Cornwall, I don't know why it does that, was the Hot Dry Rocks project at Rosemanowes in the 80s. And that's really important because it gave us the data that we use today in terms of establishing what these reservoirs do and how they behave at depth. They had a huge pumping program and a seismicity that they made 10,000 seismic events. And it's just, you wouldn't be able to do it now, but it's just an amazing resource to have to see how these fractures behave at depth. On the data wish list, to make this a proper area for exploration, we need more boreholes, we need more geophysics, and we need the data to be open so that everyone can access it and the industry can really get off the ground. So the geothermal project at Eden. The Eden geothermal development is carried out in 3 stages. We are currently still in stage 1. I work for GeoScience, which is a delivery, it's not a delivery partner, it's a contractor to Eden Geothermal, and we're providing the geological services. So there are 4 delivery partners, and I'll go through those later. But stage 1 is a 40-month industrial research project costing £16.8 million. And the money is to prepare the site, drill and test the first well for the delivery of heat. Heat is the important bit. So this project was not set up to be a power project, although it would be nice if it develops into that. Its primary goal was to provide the biomes with heat, because I don't know if any of you have been there, but there's a lot of heat that needs providing, and they're currently on gas, so that would be fantastic. Stage 2 is to drill and test the second deep well and the circulating system. And stage 3 is to design, build and commission the power and heat plant. So we're still on stage 1, and providing stage 1 goes successfully, that will hopefully unlock the funding for the second stage. So Eden Geothermal is developed by the company, Eden Geothermal Limited, and it's funded by European funding, ERDF, as was United Downs. So ERDF has been critical in getting anything off the ground in Cornwall, and for that we are super thankful. Cornwall Council, also very supportive, HM Government, and their private investor Gravis Capital. And that is where Gravis Capital will come in, is if the funding gets unlocked for the second stage. The delivery partners of Eden are Eden Project Limited, EGS Energy, that we're involved with Insign, Bestech also was Insign, and academic partner Campbell School of Mines. It's really important to have academic partners on these things because there's so much research that needs to be doing, and you get because you've got such a tight budget. I know 16 million sounds a lot, but it's really, really tight because we're charged oil and gas prices. You're often caught up in the operational day-to-day, and you don't have time to go back and look at the data and see how things are actually working. This project targets a cross course called the Great Cross Course. There are many great cross courses in Cornwall, but this is the St Austell granite flavour. And they started drilling on the 17th of May 2021, and we finished in November, the first of the 2 wells, hopefully. The depth of EG1 is a length of 5,276.67 meters. This is a really important number because the length of UD1, which is the hole drilled down the road at United Downs, was 5,275 meters long. So there's a little bit of local rivalry. However, Eden was beaten on the vertical depth. So the vertical depth of Eden was 4,871. However, having worked on the geology of both, I can now say I've drilled the longest and the deepest in Cornwall, so I'm happy. The expected temperature is 170 to 190 degrees, and we're very confident that we've got that. We saw high temperatures whilst we were drilling. And the expected outputs, like I said, this is a well for heat delivery, is enough heat for a whole rainforest, and that's what their director Gus Grand says, which is quite a nice aim. So how do we go about exploring for these faults? Well, I'm going to go for a step-by-step process of how it was done. So we look at coastal exposures first, then the mine plans, then the Eden Bedelver pit. So Eden is based in a clay pit, because as well as our traditional copper tin mining, we have a huge clay industry, and it's our second largest industry in Cornwall after tourism. And then we'll have a look at the data available by the EG1 site. So like I said, we are targeting the north-northwest, south-southeast, deeply dipping zones, and looking for cross courses that have evidence of displacement. This cross course has evidence of 180 meters of displacement. So it's a decent throw on this course, on the structure. And you can see as we come towards the site, the cross course branches off into two, to a great cross course west and a great cross course east. And that is fine, but it did cause a few issues when trying to extrapolate the data from the cross course down to depth. And we think we did see two branches of the cross course and intersect both at depth. So the field work, unfortunately, it is the most underwhelming fault at site on the cliffs. So this is the cliff exposure. You can see the trace of the Great Cross Course, but it's covered in golf courses and railway lines and vegetation, and you can see some fault segments off to the side, but it is really underwhelming. You know, you want to go there and see like a hole in the cliff, but these faults have really large damage zones, and just excuse me, just to the west there's a much better exposure of the damage zone, so we can get a feel for what these structures are doing. And you can't get there by foot, so you have to swim. This is Robin Shell, who did the prognosis, took myself and other geologist Chris Dolby on a field trip to see some of the structures in the damage zone just to the west of the picture I showed you before. And you can see some of the unmapped mine workings, which is the middle picture with copper coming down the side, and the permeability that seeps through these damage zones is quite impressive as well, just leaking through the rock. And you think, if this is just a little feature on the damage zone, what does the main feature look like at depth? It'd be great to see. Now moving up to the mine records. The cross course was recorded in several mines: West Park Consols, Eliza Consols, and New Boscondel to the west side, and the east side it was recorded in Pembroke Mine and New Pembroke Mine. And again, if you follow a north-northwest, south-southeast trend from St Austell Bay through the mine workings up to Eden, you can see it follows that line quite well, and possibly the valley as well in Trigger and Consols. So those are the mines that we had a look at. This data is really old, it's from the 1800s. And this is the sort of thing that you can see in the mine records. So you've got, they're really, really accurate, they're beautifully drawn drawings. We switched this one around so it goes west to east, not east to west, but you have the main fault zone, which dips to the northeast, which is the dominant one, and then a subordinate fault zone that dips slightly to the southwest. So they're quite complicated structures. And again, that makes predicting their behavior to depth quite tricky. Moving up towards the site, you've got the Bedelver pit where Eden is built. And luckily for us, there was a guy called Muller who did his PhD on mapping the features in the pit. And so we had access to that and were able to see that the Great Cross course went straight through the pit up to the drill site. So we're looking west, northwest here. And actually the cross course goes, the direction that it goes, it runs through the biome, and where it is in the biome, there's a waterfall that they've made. So it's just quite a nice way of indicating to people where the fault zone is. And then moving on to the site, we ran some ERT surveys just before drilling, just to try and pinpoint this dip. We were sure that it went to the east, but we just needed a little bit more confidence because we're so close to the cross course where we are. You can see EG1 there and how close it is to the Great Cross course, which is basically on the site. If it was dipping away from us, which it is, we need to know the angle as much as we can so that we don't miss it. If it's a shallow angle, the danger is we keep drilling and we wouldn't actually get to it. Whereas if it was dipping the other way and we weren't aware of that, then we'd reach it within the first few hundred meters. So that wouldn't be good either. So getting the dip of this fault was a fine art and really tricky, but that's why we ran the ERT surveys. And there were several shorter ERT survey lines to the north that had been run before, and this correlated quite well. So the low resistivity zones are the purple and blue zones, and it showed that there was just a slight dip to the east. Okay, whilst drilling, we also had some data from the seismicity. We had quite a lot of losses whilst drilling, which is great. It's good news for permeability. They did cause many seismic events, really tiny ones. The biggest they've had is a 1.1, and you can see that on the BGS website. So it's not, it's no secret. And it's really important to treat the seismicity with care and really seriously, because it is something that can not just shut a single project down, but it can have detrimental effects for the rest of the industry and when you're starting up in a country. So I think it's really important to be as open and transparent as possible with this and communicate with the wider science community to really get a handle on this, because you move water around underground, it is going to cause some microseismicity. There's no getting away from it. It's just managing it, and the chance of causing anything dangerous are really, 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 really slim, especially in such a seismically active area. But they're really useful. Seismic events are really, really useful to work out what's going on in the subsurface. And we had, like I said, a lot of mud losses from this particular zone at 3,950 meters or thereabouts. The well design was based on a conventional geothermal well. So it was 26 inches to start with. To the first 300 meters, we didn't quite get that far because drilling with a 26-inch bit in really hard abrasive granite, you're going about 1 meter an hour, and it just gets really slow and expensive. So then we moved down to the 17.5-inch bit size, down to 1,500 meters, and we kicked off the well to start steering towards our fault zone at 1,700 meters when we moved to the 12.25-inch section. Now that was the longest section in the well. The plan was to case it at 4,000 meters, but we hit the structure at 3,950 odd meters. So we had to case before that, and then we carried on through the structure, and the rest was 8.5-inch open hole. The planned time for the well completion was 150 days, and we took 175 days, which, to be honest, is quite good going, considering we had things like Brexit to contend with, and getting visas for a lot of the staff who came from Germany and such was an absolute pain. And we had COVID to contend with, which was awkward as well. And we had a few equipment failure bits, but also something that I would say for anyone looking to do a project like this is take account of the geography and transport logistics. So we're in Cornwall, we're quite far away from anywhere. All the staff came from Aberdeen or Europe, and we would have occasionally the truck would come down from Aberdeen and something would be missing off it. And then that's a whole 48 hours before we get the next load down. So that was quite a logistical challenge as well, and did rack up the days. So far, we've got our fault zone at 3,939 to 43 meters. It's quite a considerable loss zone. It's a bit of an enigma, but it's really good news that we've got it, and it seems to be feeding into other structures further away from the wellbore. So that's good, because it indicates that we've got a wider reservoir than just near borehole. We had multiple fractures throughout the 8.5-inch section, which were visible through the drilling parameters and the cuttings and the mineralogy. It was just quite masked by this feature higher up in terms of the losses. We were getting increased losses as we were hitting these zones, but this fault zone did mask quite a lot of our data. So we need to do further testing. We need further logs in the 8.5-inch section and have a look at the results and see what we've got. So I'm sorry, I can't say to you today, this is what we've done and this is what we've got. We're still very much in the process of looking at that data. Like I said, we had Cameron School of Mines as our academic partner, and they helped me in the geology cabin no end. This is from Ben Adams, a PhD student who's building up our 3D leapfrog model. And he's used the well trajectory and MWD data from the gyro for the well path, the fault plane solutions from the ERT survey and the wireline log interpretation, and the fault fracture picks are the discs in yellow, and those are zones that we picked out in the cuttings and correlated with the mineralogy, the ROP, the weight on bit, that sort of thing. And he's correlated the seismic events, or the few seismic events that we'd had at that point, with the cross courses. So it shows that although we may have this loss zone where the blue disc is going out into the well, the seismicity happens along these great cross course features. So that's a good sign, I would say. But like I said, there's much more data to follow, and we need to do quite a lot more work to really understand what we're dealing with here. So the final thoughts are, geothermal is an underused resource, and it can make a huge difference in the race to net zero. But in order to really get it established this side of the world, we need proper policy and funding in place to carry out a decent exploration program. You would never have an oil and gas program run on the scant data that we have. It just wouldn't happen. So why do it for geothermal? We need to collaborate. In my view, this is very much my opinion, in order for the industry to be a success. We need to collaborate and communicate, not just in our regions and pockets, but all of us together. And whilst the subsurface data from the projects such as Eden and United Danzel helps, we do need more data. So it goes back to having a proper exploration program. And I'd like to plug Wing. It's Women in Geothermal. As Cohen said, I'm the UK ambassador, and I really would urge women and men to get involved with the organization. It helps promote the education and professional development of women, empower women to get leadership roles within the industry. And we hold monthly webinars and newsletters, and it's also quite just a good way, a neutral space for people in the industry to talk and meet. So here are two of my favorite rocks from Eden, from the well. We've got a nice quartz crystal and some chalcopyrite. And to end, I've got my favorite cross course. This is a field trip in the summer. This is one of those big cross course features I was telling you about, really nice hematite rich cross course with the copper mineralization on the side, and a rig picture of Eden. Thank you.